Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Joel Rosen, the adrenal fatigue recovery ninja, and I'm here with my good buddy, Dr. Eric Balkavich. We're here for, I think, a fourth time or third time with Eric, but we're asking Eric to get on the call today because we got some really super exciting announcements that Eric wants to share with us. And actually, I asked him to share with us because there's been a lot of work in the making to bring this to you guys, to the market. So, hey, Eric, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Joel, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, awesome. So let's give the listener an idea of what's happened for us to get on the call today, and the background story on this new product that you've put a lot of hard work and energy into.
Yeah, so I partnered with US Enzymes in today's nutrition, and what we've developed is a sulforaphane product, and sulforaphane is a really key thing. We'll talk about it a bit. Sulforaphane is one of the best food upregulators of something called your Nrf2 pathway. And your Nrf2 pathway is the master regulator of your antioxidant and detoxification system. So this is a product that people can use to support Nrf2 and support all kinds of antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and healthy pathways. So really excited about the product. Took us a long time to get it to market, and for various reasons, but number one was just purity and quality of product. That's why it took so long.
Right, and the exciting thing with the company that you've partnered with, Eric, is that it's delivered in an enzyme sort of mineral-based type of compound. Tell us a little bit about why that makes that unique or special in that delivery system.
Well, we feel that the addition of something called estrogen is just going to help that product be utilized in the body a little bit better. Estrogen just is a powerful complex that just helps with activation and protein breakdown and absorption of nutrients. So we think it's going to be a helpful addition to the product in general.
Yeah, I had an interview with Troy a while ago, and he was talking about, oh, sorry, it wasn't Troy, it was Jason. And he was talking about how when you have that mineral blend, it just adds, from common sense wise and also from really scientific aspects, it adds to the ability of the cell to power the energy systems to utilize it effectively. And I think that's sort of in layman's terms what it does. As far as the enzyme activity of it, is there a component where the person who's taking it, who's using it for Nrf2 or antioxidant protection, where if they have, everyone understands inflammation or free radicals or reactive oxidative species, and they take sulforaphane that helps with that activation, how does the enzyme component come into it? I'm curious to know about that in terms of, is it used for digesting particles or speeding up reactions, or how does that sort of, because it ends with sulforazyme, right? So how does that enter into the designing of the product? Not to put you on the spot or anything, I'm just kind of curious.
So when we developed the product, one of the key things we wanted to do is make sure that we had good absorbability, and we had some of the potential things that may act as cofactors to make the product more functional. And we think that the estrogen it gives us those two things by adding it to the product.
Yeah, and I think too, that's what people need to understand, is that the enzyme component is more so that it gets absorbed, right? So that your body is able to utilize the nutrients and not have to work super hard at having this crazy dance with this unnatural synthetic-based nutrient that has to work really hard and spend energy to actually utilize it. And this is already giving you sort of an added fuel injector, in my opinion, in terms of that enzyme activity. So is that right? Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, I think the big thing is that anything that helps the absorption of the products we're taking, and obviously we can talk about what sulforaphane is and then what sulforazyme is, but anything that supports digestion and absorption of nutrients is going to be key, and estrogen is one of those key products that US Enzymes has that kind of help boost those things. I mean, nothing does you a lot of good unless you get good breakdown and absorption. Now, sulforaphane in general is really absorbable. I mean, it's people talk about things like curcumin that can be really beneficial in activating Nrf2 pathway as well. But I think sulforaphane has been shown to be about 105 times more effective because it's just more absorbable. The Astrozyme should boost that absorbability as well. So just a more potent product. So
Cool.
when we kind of think about when you add that product, we get better absorbability and therefore probably better utilization.
Okay, great. So as far as getting into the what sulforaphane does and how it acts in terms of the hormones and supporting metabolism of, say, estrogens, let's talk a little bit about that, Eric, because I know that's a huge problem for men and women where environmentally they have these endocrine disruptors and then stressors and inflammatory markers, and they have higher levels of these hormones and they're not necessarily clearing them out effectively. And then they kind of hang around and they junk up receptors because there's these partially metabolized stuff. So tell us a little bit about the utility beyond just the fact that it's a Nrf2 and what does it actually do for hormones and clearances.
So we'll talk about let's kind of talk about what Nrf2 is, okay? So Nrf2 is essentially the body's kind of think about it like a thermostat, okay, for the oxidative stress within the cell. So you have Nrf2 is a protein, it's loaded in your cells, it's kind of this thermostat. So when there's more oxidative stress, right, pushes that thermostat higher than it should be, then the Nrf2 is typically in a kind of a dormant state. It's bound to something called keep one, and that keep one keeps it inactive, right? So if we don't need it, we don't want it being released. And as soon as that oxidative stress goes above threshold, then keep one comes off, Nrf2 is free to enter into the nucleus, bind to these things called active response elements, and trigger the activation or the replication or the production of all these antioxidant products, anti-inflammatory products, cytoprotective products. So it stimulates this genetic cell protective mechanism, okay? So Nrf2 affects so many pathways, and you can think about what it does. And then when the oxidative stress levels start to drop below threshold, the thermostat kicks in to say, okay, let's bind up that Nrf2, let's deactivate it again. And Nrf2 only has a half-life, I think, of about 20 minutes, so it doesn't hang on. So we're constantly having this on-off of trying to prevent too much oxidative stress, but not have too little oxidative stress. And that's really, really important. There are a lot of people that are taking chronic anti-inflammatory meds. They're taking chronic antioxidant, popping these things every day. And we don't really want to do that. We need some oxidative stress. It's critical to cellular function and cellular physiology. But if it becomes excessive, then we need to control it. And that's where Nrf2 comes in. And when Nrf2 is activated, then it can bring all this stuff back under control. And there's a huge difference between activating Nrf2 versus taking one-off antioxidants, right? So if you take something like SOD, you then need to make sure that you have the downstream tools to actually break down the byproducts of that SOD. And so this is a better way. It activates the whole production system of antioxidants, helps with the recycling process of these antioxidants, and helps with the clearance and the detoxification processes. So Nrf2 is key to antioxidant effect, but not overdoing it. And it's key to detoxification as estrogens, all these other things. It really supports phase 2 enzymes of detoxification and phase 2.5 that Dr. Kelly Halderman and I talk about, which is, hey, not only do we need to make these water-soluble products, we need to get them out of the liver into the bile so that it can get pushed out of the system. So it supports both phase 2, phase 2.5. So it's really, really important stuff. Now, the other thing that's really important here is the product, right? And sulforaphane is, what the heck is this stuff? So brassica vegetables, broccoli sprouts, kale, things like that have high levels of something called glucoraphanin and something called myrosinase. And when the plant breaks down, those two things come together and produce this thing called sulforaphane. And sulforaphane has been shown to be one of the best food upregulators of the Nrf2 pathway. So it naturally can boost that Nrf2 system without overwhelming it and kind of leaving it turned on excessive antioxidative effect. So it's one of the best food regulators. So that's why we developed this product, because we wanted to support sulforaphane and its indirect antioxidant capacity and its indirect detoxification capacities via its activation of Nrf2.
Yes, a lot going on there. And it's not just a willy-nilly supplement. I mean, there's a lot of research that goes behind that and a lot of understanding, as well as the genetic susceptibilities to some of those enzymes that may be faulty as well. So basically, to summarize, is you're saying that the activation of the antioxidant system, or the balancing of free radicals with antioxidants, is controlled by Nrf2, and that should be it's actually also a circadian rhythm component, where that's super important, where I'm teaching a lot of the people that I'm working with that have a broken stress response system, that your sort of your, I guess, intrinsic sulforaphane, without having to take sulforaphane, is getting your sleep-wake cycle and your daytime, nighttime cycles working, so that Nrf2 is going to be more normalized through the circadian rhythm regulations. But what you're saying as well is that the sulforaphanes can act as is it an inhibitor or a stimulator or both? What does it do?
So sulforaphane is more of an activator, Nrf2 activator. So there's a couple things that happen, right? So Nrf2, when we're in a homeostatic state, can kind of really run that regulator really well, right? So it's when oxidative stress increases, it brings it back down. When it's too low, it makes sure it's shut down, right? So we need that balance. It acts as that regulator. The problem is that when we have excessive stress, excessive oxidative stress, then Nrf2 can get overwhelmed. It would be like if I got in a fight with one person, I can hold my own. Maybe two people, I'd hold my own. But if it was a fight with 100 people, I'm gonna become overwhelmed. And what the literature and the research is showing is that something like sulforaphane can come in and kind of help boost that Nrf2 response in these chronic inflammatory and overwhelmed states that we see with people with chronic cell danger response. So sulforaphane is a great additive when somebody's in this kind of excessive state. And so it seems to, we don't see too much of an effect where you can overly overwhelm the system, because the body has that kind of normal ability to kind of just, if the oxidative stress gets too low, it kind of shuts down Nrf2. But we can definitely see it as a beneficial benefit. But, most of the patients that we're dealing with are people with chronic stress, chronic inflammation, excessive oxidative stress. And this, I think, is a much better way to kind of support the system, because we're naturally turning on the system, and then we can allow it to naturally turn off, versus just pounding the system with individual antioxidants, which then creates another downstream effect. And so one of the big things that was important is when we take a look at, how could we get more sulforaphane into the system? Definitely, we can take a look at, you could eat more brassica vegetables, right? Definitely you could do those, but we find that the greater concentration of sulforaphane potential is really in broccoli sprouts. So I was having people grow broccoli sprouts in their kitchen, eat about a half a jar of broccoli sprouts every day. And, that's cheap. It's less expensive, but people they did it for a little bit and they fell off of it. So then we had to find supplementation. And that's where we really ran into some problems. And that is that a lot of the products that you'll see on the market are broccoli sprout extract products. So they'll just say broccoli sprout extract. And so one of the key things is, depending on how that processor processed the broccoli sprout extract, they may, if it's heat extracted or heat processed, it'll actually kill all the myrosinase enzyme. And without the myrosinase enzyme, the glucoraphanin isn't going to turn into sulforaphane. So that was a problem. The second problem is that how do we get a clean product? How do we know that the product that we're getting has it's a good quality, organic, it's not sprayed with glyphosate, it doesn't have a bunch of toxic chemicals in it? We had to source that, and that became really difficult to source it. So we definitely know that you could get broccoli sprout extract less, cheaper, but the quality of the product wasn't good. And that's not what we wanted to do, is give them more toxins into the system, right? So we needed to come up with a strategy, and US Enzymes and Today's Nutrition Tomorrow came up. We were able to help us source a really good, high quality product, glyphosate free, organic, and a product that had stable sulforaphane, which is nearly impossible to find, and stable myrosinase enzymes. So in our product, we have the broccoli sprout extract that was cold processed so it didn't destroy the sulforaphane that was there. It's actually a stabilized sulforaphane, which is really unique. And we were able to have a stabilized myrosinase enzyme, so that we could, when you put this in the body and these two components come together, not only is there sulforaphane in there, there's also a stable enzyme to convert the rest of that glucoraphanin. Many of the other products on the market are just glucoraphanin. And what people will say was, well, your gut flora can produce myrosinase enzyme, or some of the enzyme that converts that glucoraphanin, so just put it in the system and your gut flora will do it. Well, you have to have specific gut flora in specific quantities to actually do that. So if somebody has dysbiosis, or they don't have the right bacteria, they can put all that broccoli sprout extract in their GI tract, but it may never convert to actually sulforaphane. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't just giving glucoraphanin. We wanted to make sure that we were actually giving the stable enzymes to actually help with the conversion, and the fact that they were able to stabilize some sulforaphane in that product as well was just a huge bonus. So really happy with the way the product came out.
Yeah, that's super exciting. So for the average person that listening to this and realize, oh yeah, I got inflammation and I have oxidative stress and I've done a lot of antioxidants and I do fish oils, and we could go down a whole pathway on that if we wanted to. But so what would be the best utility in terms of strategies? Like, are you into a pulsing like method? Is it sort of couple days on, couple days off, or is it a couple times a day with food, without food? What's the typical ideal way of going about? I know everyone's different, but what would we use as sort of a rule of thumb?
I think if you have somebody who's really fighting chronic infection, chronic oxidative stress, and we need a tool to try and get that back under control, then we've formulated the product so that 2 a day is probably kind of that average dose that somebody could take, okay? Long term, I don't think there's a downside. I haven't read any downside to getting some sulforaphane into the diet, broccoli sprouts or capsule form. So 1 to 2 a day is probably not going to create any type of issue or problem and can support the process. If the Nrf2 pathway is and the oxidative stress load is pretty much under control, I don't see that we're going to have a downside to taking it. Somebody might need potentially a stronger dose if they're really, that oxidative stress load is out of control. But I think somewhere between 1 to 2 per day is probably a good support load. What we don't want to do is just pound the system with heavy doses of stuff and try and overwhelm the system. We want to support that oxidative stress in those antioxidant pathways, but not try and suppress the whole process. So I think what most people are going to do really well, 1 to 2 per day. And depending on how they work with their doctor, their physician, maybe even boost it up just short term, but I don't think long term. And then once they're oxidative stress and they're doing well, then, this is one of those things that they could definitely consider just pulsing, especially times of increased stress load, and, lack of sleep, more physical stress, emotional stress, microbial stress. I think one of the things that we need to be cautious of is we don't necessarily want to be pounding the body with anti-inflammatory things and antioxidants all the time. That's why I like the sulforaphane as a product. It's a food. It's going to boost or support the system. But if the oxidative stress system is showing that, the reactive oxygen species, that thermostat's showing, hey, we don't need Nrf2 to be activated, the body's pretty cool, and you're probably not going to see that Nrf2 system upregulated without purpose.
Right, right. And that's a good point, because things happen on purpose that we ignorantly go in there and try to blow what the body's doing naturally out of the water and not really get to some of the root causes, which I think with the sulforaphane, just the supplement designing itself is getting more to the tripwire, or the activation of regulating your balance between free radicals. So you are getting upstream. And also you see that there's a lot of people that have that keep one SNP, where they'll need to be on that for life, obviously, for that system to be working at full capacity. One of the questions I had for you, Eric, is, and I'm sure you get this a lot, is, well, you know, I have a thyroid problem. I heard about like the broccoli and goitrogenic type of problems. Is that going to be a problem for me? I mean, that's probably a common thing that you get a lot of. So what's your good explanation for those that just don't kind of get the science, but they want to feel reassured that that's not going to be problematic for them?
Yeah, I think that whole piece has been blown out of proportion. I don't think most people eating healthy food and especially these brassica vegetables, are at the root of their autoimmune issue. I just don't think that's the case. And I've read a lot of literature and research, and I think we've kind of disproven that in the literature and research, that these really healthy foods, especially these vegetables, are just not the problem. So I just don't see that they're goitrogenic in the dosage and the levels that we're taking these things in.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that we trip over dollars to save pennies, my analogy. And that's one where I don't know how such I guess a simple concept took so much impact on people, and it's stuck, and it's like, okay, I can't do that. It's bad. My health provider said that it's bad for my thyroid, and it's like, oh, it's like you have to undo the learning to relearn the new stuff. But anyways, as far as let's say, because I know when we look at Dutch tests and we have women that are perimenopausal or menopausal, and they have absorption issues, and their cholesterol levels low, and their estrogen levels are super low, and so is their progesterone, and they don't want to be on bioidenticals, or they are on bioidenticals, but it's still not really pumping up the volumes per se on those levels. Is there a concern with the sulforaphanes that increase the clearance of phase 1, that you'll lower it at a quicker rate and cause a depletion? Or is there a concern there at all, or not so much?
So sulforaphane and uprating Nrf2 upregulates the phase 2 detox, right? So versus phase 1. So that's an important point to make. But I haven't read anything of major concern to say that, hey, we're going to have I haven't seen anything that's going to show that, hey, we could have a problem if we take this with loss of estrogen physiology. Now, granted, if somebody's low estrogen, then and you increase their detoxification pathways, there is a potential that, they may process more estrogen out of the system. But I also believe that if they're low estrogen, we have to be concerned. Our question should really be why. I don't think that too often that the problem is that we're doing that our detoxification systems are so good and so efficient or over efficient that we're losing estrogen that way. I think we're having problems from different mechanisms. One of the issues, I think the big issues that we have to be cautious of, is that we have women who are, that we're trying to maintain estrogen levels of a 50 or 60-year-old woman at the age of, keep her levels of that of a 20-year-old. And that's just, I think that's inappropriate. And temporarily, maybe that's good, but women shouldn't, we're not designed to do that. I don't know that we're designed to maintain, the testosterone levels of in our 60s and 70s like we did in our 20s. I just don't think could you look good and feel better? You probably could, but I think the overall machinery was designed to start reducing those things over time. So definitely we need to consider with somebody who's significantly low estrogen. I don't think the detoxification process clearing too fast are the primary issue. I think probably the biggest issue is what's happening with adrenal physiology, that's not allowing the proper regulation of estrogen, or are we taking the estrogens that we are making and we have some type of upregulation or conversion to, in females' case, into more of down that androgen pathway, and that's more the problem.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I agree that these enzymes go up in activity or down in activity for a reason. Inflammatory, stress, glucose control, exposures to chemicals, toxins, and when you activate a Nrf2 sensor for having better communication with your on-off button of your antioxidant system, you are in effect going upstream. And I really find that it's interesting when people say like, oh, I had a paradoxical reaction. It's not I don't believe in that term either. I just believe that it means that the provider didn't figure out why you had that reaction. It's not paradox. It's what your body is doing appropriately to inappropriate mechanisms in the body, and we just need to figure that out. And I think it's the same thing, Eric, in terms of if, you know, because I've talked to Carrie Jones and she does say a lot in terms of, well, the sulforaphanes will lower that whole estrogen clearance, even though it helps with, you know, phase 1 and phase 2, or eliminate some of the estrogens. The bottom line is there's other stressors that need to be addressed that got us into this mess in the first place, right? So I agree 100% with what you're saying there. As far as with the antioxidant system or just the sulforaphane alone, would you say that for those that are listening, that would be a classification of a mitochondrial nutrient, an antioxidant nutrient, inflammation? Like, how would you sort of classify the overall category of the sulforaphane, given what we've talked about so far?
It's an indirect antioxidant. I think is the best way to kind of explain it. It's not a direct antioxidant because it doesn't directly upregulate any of those antioxidant pathways. It activates Nrf2, which then drives that process. And that's the natural way that the body does, is it upregulates Nrf2. So it supports that Nrf2 system. So we call it an indirect antioxidant. And so, you know, I think some of those things you're talking about, you know, as far as what's going on with their patients, anybody can have a sensitivity or a response to anything, right? And I think the big thing is that if somebody's taking sulforazyme and they have a sensitivity or response to it, sulforaphane in itself is probably not the issue. It is what's happening within the body. And that's where we have to, as physicians, help our patients out. We have to determine if a response by the body is appropriate or inappropriate, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that if it's a good or a bad thing, right? Somebody may take something and they feel a abnormal response, but that may be totally normal, right? They may consider it, that's inappropriate. I don't want to feel lousy, but that may be the perfectly normal response to a pathway being stimulated or upregulated. Kind of the same way when we look at labs. Is the lab value normal and appropriate, or is it normal and inappropriate, or is it abnormal but totally appropriate, right? We have to look at labs that way, not just high or low, but is it normal and is it appropriate or inappropriate based on what's going on with the patient. Any product we provide somebody to help support them, we need to be alert to, all right, we gave them something and they had a response. Now let's try and understand the mechanism that caused that response. And sometimes that mechanism may be uncomfortable, but it's totally appropriate for what we're trying to do. You see that sometimes with people when you're trying to, you know, if you give somebody an antimicrobial or you give them a biofilm disruptor and they go, man, I felt a little achy or fatiguey, or I felt a little sick from doing that. And that may be it's abnormal. I mean, it's an not a health, people may not feel good with it, but based on what you're trying to do, you're trying to kill an organism, and by killing the organism, maybe you release the, that LPS or the LTA, and now all of a sudden they're getting a die-off response or die-off reaction, and even though it doesn't feel good, it is appropriate based on what you just provided from a treatment standpoint. So I think especially when we're talking about sulforaphane, and you give that sulforaphane, I think if you provide it, you just have to watch the patient and say, okay, is the response I'm getting, does it seem appropriate or is it inappropriate based on what we're providing? And I think if somebody stays within that dosage under guidance, they're not pounding 8, 10, and 12 of these things a day, I don't see where they're going to have any long-term impact, or they're going to have some negative symptomatology. But if they decide that they're going to go hog wild and just down a whole bunch of them for an extended period of time, yeah, then there probably is some potential to create some unintended side effects.
Some kickback, yes. I would say kicking the ocean floor. As far as, I mean, a lot of patients want to know, like, oh, I feel headaches, or I feel hot flashes, or I have joint pains, or I have brain fog, or I crash in the middle of the day. The sulforaphane or the sulfurazine that you have, I guess you could speak to that it can help with all of those, right? Because if you're helping with your body's ability to be a antioxidant, or supporting the antioxidant system, whatever the weak link in the chain is for that person's biochemistry and physiology, i.e. their joints or their neuronal tissue or their endocrine tissue, the target sites, or the, where the imbalance is, or the reactive oxidative species are, those are the widespread improvements that someone could subjectively say they feel. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing. I mean, we live in this kind of world where, hey, I've got this symptom, I want to take this drug to change that, right? I have high blood pressure, I'm going to take this drug, it's going to change my blood pressure. When we talk about what things like sulforaphane are going to do, they're going to support the body's natural antioxidant, anti-inflammatory detoxification pathways. So the symptoms that could be impacted by that are any symptom, right? Anything that you're experiencing. So you just want to be aware of what changes you start to notice over time. And it's probably not going to be like, hey, I just took it and woohoo, right? I noticed that huge difference. Now, it can take 30 minutes to maybe 12 hours to really start to notice some change once the product gets into the system. But I think most people, what they'll start to notice is a slow progressive improvement of their symptomatology. And it could be anything, right? This, somebody could have fatigue for 50 different reasons, right? They could have a headache for blood sugar reasons, cortisol issues. They could have inflammatory mechanisms. There's so many. The symptoms aren't the problem. The symptoms are our body's expression or warning signs to say, hey, I'm not working well here. So when I give a product to somebody and we start utilizing a product, doesn't matter what it is, a lot of times I'll get that same question, what should I notice? What we're looking for is a general change in your symptomatology over time. So over the next 2 weeks to 30 days, just we're going to keep tracking where your symptomatology is and how you feel overall. And we just want to see a general change in improvement. If we see negative symptoms, then you need to let me know pretty quickly, and we'll make a decision whether that's appropriate or inappropriate based on what's going on with you, right? So I think it's almost anything you can start to, you can start to see improvement on. If you improve your overloaded oxidative stress, if you improve your inflammatory mechanisms, if you're upregulating the things that help with detoxification naturally, you're going to see improvement in a lot of things. And I think the big thing about this is when we increase Nrf2 activation, we stimulate all these pathways, genes, and systems that have a wide-ranging effect versus taking one product that's just SOD or just glutathione or just catalase, which only really has a more direct impact. This, we're turning on everything naturally, and not only are we increasing the antioxidant system, but we're also supporting the recycling of those antioxidants, right? Because when you produce an oxidant, right, in the body, you're also creating, once that oxidant's used, or that antioxidant's used, that antioxidant then becomes an oxidant. It becomes one of those free radical species, right? It becomes part of that oxidative stress. So the body then needs to be able to recycle it again. And that's where we see the benefit of upregulating Nrf2 versus just doing, just loading with vitamin E, or just loading with CoQ10, or just loading with SOD, or just glutathione, because those things are one-offs. And if we just upregulate their production and we haven't cleared or addressed the recycling mechanisms many times, we can give something, but it wind up increasing more oxidative stress. Versus upregulate the Nrf2 with something like sulforaphane, you've upregulated the systems appropriately, and the body will kind of direct, that cellular system will kind of direct what systems it needs to turn on, versus us trying to just turn on one light switch, right?
Yeah, it's like an amplifier, I guess. And what's really cool about it too is that people get that concept, Eric, in terms of, I have inflammation. I mean, people get that. Like I do, I'm always surprised when I work with someone in the capacity, do you think I have arthritis? And it's like, and they're in their 60s. And, but people get the concept that they have inflammation, or they have oxidative stress. And the idea of helping upstream, people also get the concept of, I really want to get upstream to the root cause of the problem. And part of the root cause of the problem is the signaling and the communication system, and the on-off button, and the feedback loops, and the binding, and so forth and so on, are not working optimally. And this is really what that is doing. So as far as, the sulforaphane or sulforazyme is from US Enzymes, and they don't sell directly to the end user, right? They have to go through their doctor in order to use that. Is that correct?
Yeah. So yeah, they have to go through a doctor to be able to get the product. It shouldn't be, on Amazon as like a free product to just kind of download individually. So they can utilize, I think, you can provide a code, or I can provide a code that allow them to get those products through our doctor accounts.
Yeah, and I'll just sort of follow up on that too. If you are finding it on Amazon, then it means whoever's selling it is doing it against the rules and the regulations of the companies, because they don't want their practitioners to violate that code and sell it on Amazon. And not only that, I mean, obviously this is brand new, so I don't think you'd find it there. But if it's been around for quite some time, maybe someone just had it laying around, or I just had that happen the other day, where someone bought a supplement off of Amazon, and it was a lot less expensive, or less, costly than the price that we had it from our supplement store. And it was because it could have been there forever. Who knows if it's being stored in a warehouse that's cool or whatnot. But be careful, buyer beware, in terms of, if you're saving money and it's from Amazon, typically it's going to be a violation, and it may not be the delivery of the nutrient that you had intended. It's just an aside. So, okay, cool. As far as, so we'll put a link, a coupon link to, how they can get the product, and through yourself or myself. And any other suggestions or keys or takeaways that you want to share, Eric?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is that if somebody's listening to this, via your portal or my portal, we want to make sure that that if you take a product like this, or any of the US enzyme products, I think it's beneficial to work with somebody to make sure that you're taking those things for the right reason, right? That we're just not loading, 30 supplements into the system just because I read it on a blog somewhere. Ultimately, we want to do things for a reason, right? To support as much as possible the natural aspects, or the natural way the body works, versus trying to force the body to work a certain way. And I think products like sulforaphane and the sulforazyme are great ways to do that, to support the body's natural way to function, versus us trying to just patch one little aspect of it and potentially, especially in higher doses, potentially create more problems. And I think I see that with some people taking anti-inflammatories and antioxidants, individual products, that can create a huge issue. And we want to do what we can to support the body's natural mechanisms as much as possible. And I think a product like this does that.
Yeah, and I think too, it's coming full circle where both practitioner and patient want to be able to minimize the amount of nutrients and supplementations. And you know, as bad as the sky is falling, if you will, with toxins and chemicals and cell phones and so forth in the environment that's really disruptive, you also have this great movement of getting more upstream to the regulator so that you can do less is more. So I think we're coming around to seeing that, where ultimately we are simplifying the process through research and understanding how things get triggered and activated and turned on and turned off and so forth. And I guess it really just has a lot to do with inflammation, and this is really getting at the heart of the matter. So yeah, thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate your knowledge as always. I always joke around, I do this for me so that I can steal your information, and then my users get to listen on the, you know, as sort of a spectators, as flies on the walls. So no, I appreciate it. And you always got great information. Anything new that you're developing or looking to do, or in terms of your research, just so a little like sort of a little bit of keeping us in suspense? What's new for Eric?
Yeah, so I'm still working on a book on thyroid physiology. I brought in a friend of mine, Dr. Kelly Halderman, to kind of work with me on and try and get that book finished. Tying together some of the mechanisms that drive what we call cellular hypothyroidism. And, you know, maybe one of those things that we could talk about sometime in the future is these parent essential oils, and those versus things like fish oils and the impact that has on cell membrane health and mitochondria. So that's a huge thing I'm working on right now. And I appreciate you turning me on to Dr. Peskin's book on the PEO solution. And some of the research that's in his book that he's pulled out of the literature is flies in the face of pretty much everything we've been told about omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. But when you start to really look at how, you know, adulterated fish oil, adulterated oils in general, and things like fish oil, how they can really have a negative impact on cellular health, mitochondrial health. Now, and you start to kind of see what that means, you now really get an understanding of why we're chronically ill. And so that'll be part of the book, and we'll probably do more podcasts and information on those things in the near future.
Yeah, I saw him talk, and he, you know, I guess has been in the crosshairs whenever you say controversial things that's against, you know, the establishment, especially when there's monetary, you know, concerns behind it. But he, you know, he's definitely well researched, and his name's Dr. Brian Peskin, The PEO Solution. Great book, very, very thick. You know, I've read it a couple times. As far as you know, how do people get in contact with you, Eric? You know, what sites do you have, and what information do you deliver, where and how and when? How can they follow you and find out where you are?
So they can follow me on Instagram. I think Dr. Eric Balcavage on Instagram. They can reach me at my office at www.rejuvigencenter.com. On Facebook, it's Rejuvigen or Rejuvigen Center. I also have Thyroid Thursdays, so on YouTube or Vimeo, you can find me doing my Thyroid Thursday videos on there. And we have the Thyroid Answers podcast, which is available on iTunes and some other outlets, where I partner with Dr. Erica Riggleman, and we kind of answer some of the important questions about thyroid physiology. And, you know, to some degree, I think we're a little bit controversial to some, because we're talking about what other people aren't talking about, maybe kind of going against the grain of what even within functional medicine, what the general consensus is of what to do in functional medicine for thyroid physiology. And we're kind of exposing some of those things that it's not necessarily some of the best things to do, and giving some real answers.
No, that's awesome. Well, thanks for your time. Super busy. I know you are. Just it takes one to know one, and I
Yep.
appreciate your all your insights and good luck on future endeavors. And I'm sure we'll have you back on for part 5. So thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah, and we'll get you back on the Thyroid Answers podcast sometime soon. All right.
Sounds good, Eric. Thanks. Have a great day.
All right, Joel. Thanks.
All right.